Hello, my name is Stukonytė. I got my bachelor's degree in biology here at Vilnius University a few years ago. And currently I'm studying master's in oceanography at the University of Barcelona. Apart from doing research, which is currently about sperm whales, I recently co-founded a new science communication project here in Lithuania called Po bangom, or Under the Waves, which I will talk about a little bit more at the end of this presentation. In the meantime, my topic of today is Ocean Literacy 101, or what every person should know about the ocean. So we live in a society where science and technology are as important as never. However, as you might have seen recently, scientific information doesn't always reach the broader public. We have a good example of what's happening with vaccines currently around the world. People lack scientific understanding, and they can get easily disinformed by false sources of information or just pure gossip. And this can have really negative consequences, as we can see. Even if scientific information reaches the public, it's often too difficult to understand to a non-scientific person. It's science after all, so it's meant for scientists, right? So to improve the situation of a lack of scientific knowledge in the general public and overall a lack of interest in science, I think it's very important for scientists to learn to communicate with the public. In the end, science seeks to improve our lives and our world, but it's difficult if too many people don't understand how it works. But when people have the basic knowledge, they should be more able to reason and to distinguish between trustable and false information. And like this, we can all try to make the world a better place. But coming back more specifically to my today's topic, I'd like to ask you, what do you see in this picture when you see the Earth from space? What captures your attention? I think this perspective makes us see just how blue it is. In fact, 2/3 of the Earth's surface are covered by the ocean, and 97% of the Earth's water is in the oceans. But here in Lithuania, in my opinion, we don't talk enough about this enormous part of the Earth. It's not too surprising, though, as we only have access to a relatively short coastline. But I think most of us will agree that here in Lithuania, we are in love with forests. To us, they're mysterious and inspiring, relaxing. They're home to many creatures. They also provide the oxygen we breathe and eliminate CO2 from the atmosphere, which is super important for our survival. But how many of us take note that the oceans do all these things and even more? The oceans produce a minimum of 50% of the world's oxygen and biomass, and in this process, they eliminate about the same percent of CO2 from the atmosphere. And that's just one fact that often remains forgotten. And that's what some people call ocean blindness. So I think it's been a long time that we didn't pay attention to that because we lack the so-called ocean literacy. We were unaware just how much the health of the ocean affects each of us. At least in my days, I haven't heard about this at school. I hope things are starting to change now. So what exactly is ocean literacy? Ocean literacy is the understanding of how we affect the ocean and how the ocean affects us. And there are 7 main principles proposed by the ocean literacy frameworks, like the holy grail of what every person should know about the ocean. And I would like to take the chance and explain them to you today. So probably most people know about the Atlantic, the Pacific, Indian, and Antarctic oceans. Probably fewer of them know about the Southern Ocean, but what the first principle wants to say is that all of these oceans, in fact, are connected into one big ocean of our planet. All these named oceans aren't separated by anything, and a global current circulation system called the global conveyor belt that you can see in this picture, it connects all of them. The circulation system is driven by permanent winds, the Earth's rotation, and water density differences. and it moves the water from one ocean to another. So when something happens in one part, it can also affect the others in more or less time. Even a rather small and secluded Baltic Sea is still part of the global ocean. The second principle tells us that the mechanical and biogeochemical processes that happen in the ocean shape the features of our planet. And it's not just the fact that the movements of the waves are responsible for many different cliffs and landscapes. Also, many materials we find on Earth originate from biogeochemical cycles in the ocean. An example of this is chalk, which originates from carbonate skeletons of marine organisms. Another example, the white sand that makes up small islands, such as the Maldives, is produced mainly thanks to an animal called parrotfish, which feeds on rocky corals and excretes this white sand. These fish are highly important for the production of sand, which composes islands of coral origin. And that's just one example. So the third principle, in my opinion, has a huge visible effect on us all, and that is the complete influence of the ocean on weather and climate. Weather and climate are controlled by interactions between the atmosphere and the ocean. So the ocean absorbs most of the solar radiation reaching the Earth, and then the heat exchange between the ocean and the atmosphere drives the water cycle, as well as oceanic and atmospheric circulation. And this affects the weather and climate conditions in every place of the Earth. An example of this is, for example, cyclones, which are born over the Atlantic Ocean and then they bring rain here to Lithuania. In fact, most of the rain that falls on land originates in the ocean. On a long-term global scale, the ocean has a major importance on the CO2 uptake from the atmosphere. If not for the oceans, our CO2 levels, which are already rapidly rising, would be much higher, because in the ocean we have a process that we don't have on land, which is called the carbon sink. So during this process, photosynthetic phytoplankton absorbs CO2 from the atmosphere in the process of photosynthesis, and it incorporates the CO2 into their cells. Then what happens with this phytoplankton? It either dies and sinks to the bottom or is ingested by other organisms, which eventually also die and sink to the bottom. So like this, they also take a good part of the incorporated CO2, which sinks together with them, and our atmosphere is saved from all this extra CO2. So this takes us to the next principle, which says the ocean made the Earth habitable, and in fact, it still does. So I'm sure you've all heard of this theory that the first life forms on Earth were evolved in the ocean, in the so-called primordial soup. After that, oceanic organisms produced oxygen, which allowed the evolution of all the diversity of life forms on land. And the ocean continues to provide us water, oxygen, nutrients, and as I already mentioned, it also mediates the climatic condition that makes life possible to survive on Earth. While the ocean surely helped the evolution of life on land, life continued to evolve underwater as well. And now, today, we find a range of organisms there, from the smallest microbes to the largest animal that ever lived, the blue whale. And also differences in salinity, acidity, light, temperature, circulation, and other factors of the ocean create a variety of different ecosystems. From the deep sea habitats with their black smokers and other hydrothermal vents, where we can find the most extremophilic life forms, such as bacteria that thrive in temperatures of hundreds of degrees Celsius, high acidity and no light, to tropical coral reefs, which have such huge biodiversity that they are equivalent to the tropical rainforests on land. And here's a fact that should be of particular interest to this faculty. The search for new drugs has shown that marine invertebrates, such as different sponges, tunicates, annelids, coral, and others, they produce a variety of potential antibiotic, anti-cancer, and anti-inflammatory substances, which could be derived, isolated, and derived in laboratories to create new drugs. Between these two extremely different ecosystems, there's a variety of other ones, which I would like to mention a little bit, just a few of them. So for example, kelp forests, which are so important to many open sea coastal zones. So kelp forests are one of the most productive ecosystems on Earth, and they are characterized by large brown macroalgae. If you haven't seen the movie My Octopus Teacher, you should really go see it on Netflix because it will make you fall in love with kelp forests. Another one I'd like to mention is seagrass beds. So important, for example, to the Mediterranean Sea. In contrast to kelp, seagrass is actually a marine saltwater plant, not algae, and they provide shelter and feeding grounds to many endangered animals, such as sea turtles, seahorses, dugongs, and they also provide coastal protection because they absorb some wave energy that comes towards the shore. So there are many other oceanic ecosystems that I would like to tell you about, but there's just not enough time to talk about all of them. So let's move on to the sixth principle. So as you already might have noticed, the ocean and humans are really tightly connected, and that's what the sixth principle tells us. Much of the world's population actually lives in the coastal areas, but the ocean affects not only them. We don't just depend on it for half of our oxygen, our water, climate, food, medicine, fossil fuels, and energy, like that wasn't enough. It also creates many jobs and drives the economy. And I'm not just talking about important economical drivers such as fisheries and maritime transport industry. For example, coastal areas drive most of the global tourism. And in fact, 1/3 of the world's tourists spend their holidays on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, which seems quite incredible to me. So things like healthy beaches, underwater life and landscapes, which you can see when snorkeling or diving, or ecotourism activities, all these things help the economy through tourism. Healthy oceans provide us a place to relax, to explore, to get inspired, and to make economic profit. Worth saving, isn't it? Even so, it is quite shocking to think that only 5% of the ocean today is known to us, and exploring it is not just a matter of curiosity. We needed to better understand how our life support system works, and our very survival depends on it. Understanding the ocean requires cooperation between various disciplines. It needs biologists, chemists, geologists, physicists, engineers, and many other people from different spheres. So these were the 7 principles of ocean literacy, the information that our societies should know. And now you might want to ask me, what can I do with this information? Now I understand that these things are important, but what can I do to help oceanic ecosystems? And as I mentioned, I think to help our planet, it is crucial to spread the awareness to a broader public. And as there are really few initiatives in Lithuania, me and my 2 colleagues created a project called Pobangom, or Under the Waves, which you can find in this link, and you can follow it through social media. So on our website, you can find information about the steps that you can take in order to preserve the ocean and thus a healthy planet. And we also raise awareness about new scientific discoveries through weekly oceanic news in Lithuanian language. And we share personal stories from scientists, divers, sailors, and other ocean enthusiasts, hoping to create a community spirit and inspire more people. So if you are one of them and you would like to share your story with us, let us know and join our Lithuanian ocean community. So the takeaway messages that I would like to leave you with today are, first of all, we need to talk more about the oceans for the sake of our planet. We don't do this enough in Lithuania, although I'm really happy to see more and more events like this one happening, and I think it's an amazing start. And secondly, fellow people from the science field in general, please share your science with the public. Let's make our society more scientifically literate, more interested, more aware, and let's make them trust science. Here are my information sources about ocean literacy. And thank you for listening. And now let's make some waves in Lithuania.
So I guess I'll get started. Hello, my name is Jaida Elcock. I am a shark scientist and I study elasmobranch movement ecology and habitat use. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about shark diversity. So sharks are in the class Chondrichthyes and the subclass Elasmobranchii. So sharks, skates, and rays are all in Elasmobranchii. So those are all the really close relatives. A different subclass called holocephali is the chimeras, sometimes called ghost sharks. You might have seen those before. Don't have a picture of one on this slide, but yeah, so we're gonna talk about sharks. Sharks alone, there are over 500 species that we know of, which is wild to think about. That's so many more than many people expect. And they differ in so many different ways. So shape, size, habitat, different abilities, social behaviors, feeding modes, and modes of reproduction, all of these different things. So I'm going to go a little bit into each one of these different categories and kind of give an example of a shark that might be different in one of these ways. And I try to include some of the more underrepresented sharks out there because there's just so many and we like to focus on a very select few. But yeah, so let's get into it. So first, we're going to talk about a little bit how sharks can differ by shape. Some of these might be pretty well-known species already. Everyone knows about the hammerheads, but they have these ridiculous head shapes. And there are many different species of hammerheads that all differ by head shape as well. So you've got, smaller heads that might be a little bit more round. You've got the wing heads that are very long and skinny. And then you have the great hammerhead like we see here. And it's believed, we're not exactly sure, but it's believed that this cephalofoil is what it's called, might help with their sense of smell and their eyesight. So definitely kind of a weird shape, might be kind of advantageous for them. And these guys live like in the tropics. You might be able to find them in Florida or in the Caribbean, things like that. We also have the mako shark, built for speed. They look like a torpedo, and they've got this it's called a keel at the end of their tail before the tail fin starts, that kind of helps reduce drag, and just their shape overall makes them so incredibly fast, which is why the short fin mako is the fastest shark in the ocean. These guys can also be found in the tropics and the subtropics and warm temperate waters, so like the east coast of the US. Yeah, these are some really cool sharks. Then we have the wobbegong, maybe not as well known. This guy looks like a carpet, and they're built for ambush hunting. So these guys can actually rest on the bottom. They don't have to keep swimming in order to breathe. But these guys can rest on the bottom and they kind of disguise themselves as like corals or rocks and things like that. And they are very hard to find sometimes. So then a fish will come by, not suspecting anything, thinking that it's just part of, the rocky background. And then the wobbegong can pounce and grab that fish, and that's how it hunts, which is really, really, really cool to see. So I would recommend looking at the YouTube video of that if you can. And these guys can be found predominantly in Australia. There's a bunch of different species, but I think the one that I'm thinking of, the ornate wobbegong, don't quote me on that, but most of them are found in like Australia. And then we have the thresher shark, which is my favorite shark. These guys are also built for kind of a weird mode of hunting. Their tail is actually makes up about half of their body length. So they can be a total of up to 20 feet long, and their tail alone is like 10 feet. And they use it as a whip. So they swim really, really fast towards a bait ball full of fish. And then they stop on a dime and use that tail to whip its prey, stunning and killing anything in the area, and then they can just go through and collect whatever's not moving. And it's one of the coolest things I've ever seen. Not in person, of course. Again, you should definitely look up a YouTube video, but these guys are pretty wide ranging and live in generally just pelagic ecosystems out in the open ocean. So a little bit about size, very big size differences in the shark world. So the largest shark, also the largest fish on the planet, is the whale shark. They can get to over 40 feet long, but average about 35 feet or 10 and a half meters. These guys can be found typically in, tropical and temperate waters. And then we have the basking shark, which is the second largest fish. And they can be over 33 feet, over 10 meters long, but typically average around 26 feet or 8 meters. And these guys can be found in temperate waters, often seen off the coast of like Scotland, the eastern US, and I believe they can also be found in the Baltic Sea. So that's really cool. Then we go to the other end of the size spectrum, and we have the smallest shark. The dwarf lantern shark, as well as the pocket shark, which I don't have pictured here, are two sharks that are kind of rivaling each other for the title for the world's smallest shark. They max out at like 20 centimeters long. So they're definitely small, and they average about 15 centimeters. These guys, the dwarf lantern sharks, can be found in the western and central Atlantic Ocean. I'm going to talk a little bit about these guys again later, but they are bioluminescent, which I think is really cool. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So going into specifically habitat, we think of, a lot of people like to think of sharks as, like living in the tropics, and they're only near like the Bahamas and things like that. But that is totally not true. For example, we have some pretty cold water sharks. We have the Greenland shark, which lives out in the Arctic and the North Atlantic. It is believed to be the oldest living vertebrate species on the entire planet. They found one that they dated between, I think, 300 to 512 years old. So ridiculous age range. They can get so incredibly old, and they just have very slow lifestyles because they live in such cold waters. Then we do have what we think of as more of like a tropical shark. Tropical and subtropical, the tiger shark, is that's where it lives, can be found in warm temperate waters as well. And we do have coastal versus pelagic ecosystems, and the oceanic whitetip is a great example of a pelagic ecosystem shark. They live out in the open ocean, where I guess sometimes is considered like a desert, because there's just not really a lot of prey resources out there. So they kind of they're very opportunistic in that way. But yeah, they live out in the middle of the open ocean, in tropical and subtropical waters. Then we have a more coastal species, the blacktip reef shark, lives in the Indo-Pacific and lives on, as you might be able to guess, coral reefs, which is really cool. These guys are pretty cool to see when people are out, diving in a reef ecosystem. It's probably pretty common to see these guys. And then we have the deep sea. I'm sure you all know the deep sea is full of so many weird animals, and the cookie cutter shark is definitely one of them. These guys can be found all over the world below 1,000 meters. So they're out there in very deep water, and there's a lot of other sharks that can be found in pretty deep water as well. A little bit about their different abilities. There's so many different abilities that sharks have that some people just don't think about. For one, like I said before, bioluminescence. There are glow-in-the-dark sharks, and if that's not the coolest thing ever, I don't know what to say. Like that's so incredibly cool. So first we have the lantern shark. Is, like I said, bioluminescent. They have they can basically produce their own blue light. And I believe the pocket shark is also bioluminescent, and kind of like a squid will like squirt bioluminescent goo, presumably to try to escape from predators. But that is just one of the weirdest things I've ever heard of. And then we have the swell shark, which is fluorescent, which is a little bit different, but it produces basically green light. And we can't see it with our naked eye, but we can see it with technology, and other swell sharks can see it on other swell sharks. There are a bunch of different species of swell sharks, so they live in a bunch of different regions. And another cool thing about the swell shark is that they're named for their ability to swell. So if they're being chased by a predator, they will like gulp in a ton of seawater and swell to this big bulbous ball, like a balloon almost, and then it makes it hard for the predator to get their mouth around it, or they will wedge themselves into a crevice and then balloon up, so then it's hard for the predator to get them out. So Swell shark is kind of weird. I love them. I think they're super cute. Yeah, a really cool shark. We like to think of sharks as being solely ectothermic, and that is also not true. There are a bunch of different sharks that have at least some level of body temperature regulatory abilities. These would be the lamnid sharks, so like the great white, the poor beagle. I believe the poor beagle can be found out in the Baltic Sea as well. And the salmon shark kind of takes it to new levels. They can raise their body temperature to, I believe, 60 degrees Fahrenheit above surrounding water temperatures. I'm not sure what that is in Celsius. I'm sorry. But yeah, like a wild amount of thermoregulation abilities in that shark. These guys live out in the North Pacific, in like Alaska is a pretty common place for them to be found. There are also sharks that can breach. I'm sure we've all seen on like Shark Week when the shark, like a great white, jumps out of the water trying to catch a seal. But my favorite breaching shark is the spinner shark. A lot of people hear about the spinner dolphin, but there's also a spinner shark. So it just jumps out of the water, spins a bunch of times, and then hits the water again. And I just think that that's really cool. I'm not 100% sure why they do it, but it's a really, really fun thing to watch. These guys also live out in like the tropical, subtropical type of regions. Sorry, my window is open, so if you're hearing some crows, apologies. Then we have buccal pumping, which a lot of people think that, you know, sharks have to keep swimming, otherwise they die, they can't breathe. And that's not true for a lot of sharks, including the zebra shark. So basically what it does is it can force water into its mouth and over its gills while resting on the seafloor. So it doesn't have to swim in order to breathe. It can breathe without moving, and that's a really cool thing. So nurse sharks can also do this. I'm sure you've seen images or like in an aquarium, a nurse shark just kind of sitting on the bottom. They're buccal pumping in order to breathe. Yeah, and the zebra shark also lives in tropical environments and can be found on the coast of like Australia and Africa and Asia. And then we have the walking shark, as people fondly refer to it as. This is the epaulet shark living out in the Western Pacific. They can kind of, in a way, walk on land. So they live in like intertidal ecosystems. When the tide goes out, sometimes they'll get stuck without water or stuck in a very small pool of water. So they need to be able to get themselves to a larger body of water. So what do? They walk. They can survive out of water for longer than I believe any other shark species. And when you see them moving on the rocky reef, it really does look like they're walking. So they're just kind of moving their fins in a way that I guess looks like any other tetrapod walking. And so they just walk to a bigger body of water. And I think that that's really cool. So again, a little bit of homework for you. Definitely look up a video of them walking because it is really, really, really cool. Okay, now we'll go into social behaviors a little bit. A lot of sharks are solitary, like the bull sharks. These guys are solitary, but sometimes they hunt in pairs. These guys also live in, you know, tropical, subtropical regions, but if you didn't know, they can also be found in freshwater. They have been found so far up the Mississippi River that they were found in, I believe, Illinois, which is that's really close. Or it's not really close, apologies. It's not close to the ocean at all if you don't know where Illinois is. It is far up the Mississippi River, and it's been found over 2,000 miles up the Amazon River, so they can survive in freshwater for a very, very long time. But I guess the point of this slide was to say that they are solitary, and they tend to kind of be seen by themselves. Whereas the scalloped hammerhead, you might be able to see them in social groups, possibly for foraging, possibly for migration, maybe for mating purposes, not 100% sure. And it kind of depends on the species of sharks. Basking sharks can also be found in social groups like this. And a group of sharks, which I think is really fun, is called a shiver, if you didn't know that. So that's a little fun word to add to your vocabulary. Okay, now we can go into modes of feeding. There are a bunch of different modes of feeding. We first have the great white. We have to talk about the great white. It is the largest predatory fish on the planet. And I'm sure you've seen them, like I said before, on Shark Week, like breaching to get a seal or scavenging on a whale carcass and things like that. So yeah, very predatory organisms. And these guys also live worldwide in like coastal and pelagic ecosystems. Then we have our filter feeders, which seems very weird for a shark to be a filter feeder, but there are the whale sharks and the basking sharks are filter feeders. And I believe that the megamouth shark is a filter feeder as well. A big difference between the whale shark and the basking shark is that the whale shark is an active filter feeder, meaning that it pulls water into its mouth to collect prey items, whereas the basking shark just it's a passive filter feeder. So it just opens its mouth and swims along and collects whatever it collects. And finally, very, very weird shark. We have the bonnethead shark, a species of hammerhead that lives out in the Eastern Pacific and Western Atlantic, is the only known omnivorous shark. They eat, digest, and get nutrients from seagrasses from time to time. So that's not something that we expected. We all think of sharks as being hyper carnivorous and only ever eating animal matter. And the bonnethead shark's kind of proving us wrong there. So definitely a weird shark and one of my favorites. And then we have modes of reproduction. Sharks said, I want to do it all. They do so many different modes of reproduction. So we have oviparous, which is just egg laying. The horn shark is a good example of that. And you can see this, this weird spiral shaped egg over here that helps it, like those spirals help it wedge into different crevices so that it won't get taken away by predators or maybe a current or anything like that. It'll try and keep it snug and safe. Yeah, so these guys lay these super weird eggs. They live out in, you know, subtropical areas, specifically in California. Definitely a really cool shark. And they're really small and cute too. Then we have aplacental viviparity, I believe is the new name for it. It used to be called ovoviviparous, which is where they have eggs that hatch inside the mother and then they give live birth. My favorite example of this is the sand tiger shark. These guys live in the Atlantic and the Western Pacific, typically in like a coastal environment. But the sand tiger shark is my favorite example of this because sand tiger sharks have 2 uteruses and they have multiple eggs in each uterus. One egg will hatch from each uterus, eat all of its siblings, and then one shark emerges from each uterus. So they only ever have 2 babies at a time. Truly vicious. Very, very cool. Like the epitome of survival of the fittest. I think that that's a really, really cool example of a very aggressive type of aplacental viviparity. And then we have just viviparous sharks that are basically like placental. They give live birth, and a good example of this is the spiny dogfish that lives out in the Atlantic. There are multiple species of spiny dogfish. I've worked with the Pacific spiny dogfish, but there is also an Atlantic spiny dogfish, which can be found in the Baltic Sea as well. And a question that I get asked all the time is, how do you tell the difference between a male shark and a female shark? And that is a fantastic question. The answer is males have claspers and females don't. So if you can see over here, hopefully you can see my mouse, underneath its tail by its pelvic fins, you can see these appendages, these like modified fins almost. Those are the claspers, and you will find those on a male, but you won't find it on a female. So if you kind of just look underneath its tail, if you see claspers, that is a boy shark. If you don't see any, it's likely a female shark, or it's a juvenile male that has very, very small claspers. That's really hard to see. So I'll go a little bit into some misconceptions about sharks. We talked a little bit about sharks have to keep swimming or they'll die. That is true for some sharks, but false for others. So like I said, the nurse shark, the zebra shark, a lot of other sharks don't have to keep swimming in order to breathe. Examples of sharks that do need to keep swimming or they will die because they can't breathe is, let's see, the bull shark, the great white shark, hammerheads, things like that. Those are what we call obligate ram ventilators, where they have to keep swimming in order to get water into their mouth and over their gills in order for them to breathe. So again, not true for all sharks, but for some sharks it is true. Another thing is a lot of people think that shark skin looks soft. It's definitely not. So sharks have what we call dermal denticles, which is basically just means that their skin is made out of itty bitty teeth, and those teeth look very different depending on the shark species, which I think is really cool. But if you were to, not recommending that you pet a shark, please don't do this, but if you were to pet a shark from head to tail, it might be kind of smooth. If you were to go from tail to head, it's like sandpaper. And when you're out in the field and you're working with these sharks, tagging them and doing workups, getting like blood samples and things like that, you can get what's called shark burn. It's kind of like road rash or a carpet burn, but from a shark, exactly what it sounds like. And it basically gives you this big rash and like this big raw area on whatever you've, like your arm or your leg, whatever's been touching the shark too much. Yeah, shark skin is not soft. It's definitely like sandpaper. And I think that's kind of cool. Their skin is made out of basically teeth. That's the coolest thing ever. And then I'd love to mention that sharks are definitely not mindless killers. They're good predators, and they go after what they know is a prey item. Most of the time when a person is bitten by a shark, it's out of curiosity. The shark has no idea what you are. The only way they have to investigate what you are is with their mouth, and kind of like a dog, and that just doesn't really end well for some people. Or it's out of fear or protection. It's been provoked. If it thinks that it's going to be injured, or you're in its space for too long or anything like that, it might be like, hey, it's time for you to leave, giving you warning. So it's important to, know the shark's behaviors and see what's going on. If you do find yourself in the water with a shark, just be aware of what the shark is trying to communicate to you. Or if you look like a prey item. So people on a surfboard might look like a seal or a sea turtle or something, and the shark goes in for a bite, realizes that's not at all what I wanted, and it'll just swim away. They don't go after people on purpose, really at all. Sharks kill on average around the world 5 people every year, but we kill at least 100 million sharks every year, and likely much more, whether that's on purpose, whether it's a targeted fishery, or if it's just bycatch. We're killing a lot of sharks. So I feel like they should be more afraid of us than we are of them. And we should be concerned if we don't see them in the ocean. They are very, very important parts of our ecosystems. They can be, mid-level predators. They can be prey items for other animals. They can be apex predators. They can be indicator species telling us, like how healthy is the environment that they're living in and things like that. So it's very important that we keep sharks around and that we're monitoring them, because they can tell us a lot about the health of our oceans. And one of my favorite facts that I share with people is that you're more likely to be killed by a flying champagne cork, or a falling coconut, or a cow, a dog, a lightning strike, a vending machine of all things, than you are to be killed by a shark. So they're really not just mindless killers. They belong in the ocean. They don't infest the waters. They live there. That's their home. We just have to be aware that they are in the water, and we might come across one from time to time, but the chances of them actively trying to do anything to any harm to us is very, very, very low. So I guess the message here is to just respect sharks, understand that that's where they live, and just learn as much about them as possible, because they're really, really cool animals, and they're super important. And I think that they deserve more credit than they're given for how amazing they are. So yeah, it's definitely okay, I think, to have a healthy fear of sharks, as long as we're making sure that we're still respecting them and their environments. So I believe that's not all I have. Anyway, I do have this organization that I helped to co-found in June of 2020, called MISS, also known as Minorities in Shark Sciences. This is a program dedicated to helping women of color in the field of shark science. If you are interested in checking out our website, it is misselasmo.org. We're also miss_elasmo on social media. And we provide a lot of cool opportunities, fully funded opportunities for women of color trying to get experience in shark sciences. And if you're interested in the mission, but maybe you don't identify as a woman of color, you can always apply to be a friend of MISS rather than a member, and still be involved with our organization and support our mission and help support our members. So yeah, I think that's all I have for you guys. So sorry if I went fast. If you've seen my animal fact videos, you know how fast I can talk. But yeah, I hope that you guys enjoyed this. And I sure did. Any chance I get to talk about sharks, I'm having a great time. So I grew up in a landlocked state. I grew up actually in the middle of the desert of all places. And I watched a lot of like documentaries as a kid about the ocean and about sharks in general. And I realized that they're very highly misunderstood animals, and that we should be respecting them more. And there needs to be a lot more work done to fully understand them and their life. So I figured that I would jump into shark sciences because it seems like a really cool like field of study. So that's what I did. Now I'm a graduate student. I've been through a few different internships. I did an internship at an aquarium. I got some experience with a lot of different shark species and a bunch of different ray species, and it was really cool to kind of see how their what am I trying to say? Their personalities differ within the same species, because people don't think that like fish have personalities, but oh, they definitely do. Some of them are really shy. Some of them are pretty outgoing. Some of them are like very food motivated. It's really cool to see. So that was a really fun experience at the aquarium. And then I did a research internship out at Friday Harbor Labs in Washington, where I worked on skate egg cases and looking at different species of egg cases and the different textures that they have on them, and how those textures and the different shapes and sizes of the egg cases help them stick to the substrate so they don't get like swept away by a current, and they stay in like the place they were laid, which is hopefully a very good place for them with a lot of water flow, a big nursery site with a bunch of other egg cases and things like that. So that was really fun research, and I'm still doing a little bit on that as well. But now I'm focused more on shark movement ecology and habitat use. So we're tagging sharks to see like where they're going, what they're doing, and we're using this new-ish technology called like biologgers that gives us really high resolution, like fine scale details of their movements. So we get, I think the tag that I have is like, there's like 64, 65 data points per second. So we're seeing like exactly how much they're moving and like their tail beat and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. So that's giving us really like a really close look at what exactly they're doing. So if they're diving, what are they doing when they're diving? Like, are they moving really rapidly, or are they just chilling? Like, are they migrating? Are they foraging? And all kinds of stuff like that. And so we can use this technology to kind of see like where they're going, what they're doing, how are they identifying like mating grounds, how are they identifying foraging grounds, how are they picking certain like oceanographic structures to use in order to forage, or all kinds of things like that. Because some sharks use like, they're called eddies, like these like mini currents, I guess, like mini ocean gyres, to like dive deeper to get into like this huge prey base in the mesopelagic that's deeper than the shark might be able to go usually. And these oceanographic structures are allowing them to go that deep in order to get access to these prey items. So there's so many different questions I have, and I'm so excited to do the research to start answering them. Yeah, it's a lot of really cool stuff. I'm just very excited. There's so many cool questions you can ask, and there's so much technology you can use. And I'm really excited to kind of get out there and start like tagging sharks and interacting with them safely, of course, and seeing what the heck these sharks are doing.